And that is what we need to change. We need to have people, their citizens viewed, it's up to us. We cannot respect ourselves if we give our children something to inherit that we wouldn't appreciate. And no one appreciates inheriting a $9 trillion debt in huge, huge deficits for the foreseeable future, and spending $1 trillion, not to protect our own liberties, but to protect Afghanis or Iraqis or whoever, under this idea that we're omniscient, we're omnipotent, we should push everybody around because we're an empire. Now, one of the ironies with the current situation is these particular characteristics of the United States were accelerated by the demise of the disintegration of the Soviet Union. That was what made us more arrogant, because then there was nothing out there to check us. That, in some way, was the beginning of the end. We remember right after the collapse of the Berlin, Fukuyama wrote, "The end of history. Democracy and freedom is won everywhere. We don't have to worry about anything. We have reached nirvana." Utter and complete nonsense, but everyone is inclined to think this is great. No, sometimes you're safer having less physical power, if you have the psychology that's right, than you are by having more guns. And that's where we are today. We don't recognize, no, more weapons, more military projection, more spending isn't necessarily safer. It can be riskier if you create enemies and you destroy the own internal checks and balances that give legitimacy to your government. Because ultimately, the government is strong as the people. If we had a true defense like I described, and everybody was here defending only the United States, we don't need a standing army. We'd treasure our freedom, and we'd fight spontaneously if everyone attacked us. And you do not need people necessarily trained in the highest level of use of weapons to win. That's what the independence of Israel should teach us. They didn't have standing army. They defeated 100 million Arabs. And we can do that as well, and we need to be confident. We don't need military everywhere. We'll fight, and we'll be proud of defending our country because it's our country we're defending, not some cave thousands of miles away.
Got time for one more question?
Hi, I know you touched on this earlier. A couple other people had questions similar to it, but and I know you already talked about Gitmo with Obama, but his platform was pretty strong. Down with Gitmo, we're going to get out of Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. Do you see any indication that anything remotely like that will happen on the horizon, and not just like the repeal of the Patriot Act, stuff like that, but bringing people home at all?
No. The answer is none. There are no earmarks indicating that any of those promises will be, to borrow from Shakespeare, honored in the breach rather than the observance. If anything, he's increasing troops in Afghanistan. Even when all the NATO partners say, well, we don't understand what you're doing. We'll train the police there. As though the problem in Afghanistan right now is the tribalists don't know how to shoot straight. They're not trained in weaponry, even though it's a Kalashnikov culture. That's the problem. We need to train them to use force, which is absurd on its face. No, if we're going to train them, we have to train them and give them loyalty to the government because it's worth defending, which is beyond our capacity. But no, there is no. And now what Obama says that we're eliminating our military presence in Iraq, except he's going to leave 50,000 troops in there. But like in Gitmo, he's going to say they're non-combat troops. They're going to confront danger and have to have weapons, but we'll call them non-combat. Now, 50,000 troops, that's more than all the troops we have in Japan with our defense treaty. It's more than all the troops we have in South Korea. This is removing our troops. And I would wager that he's not going to even get close to $50,000. As the political dynamics in Iraq tears it to shreds, as we start to remove, the military people say, we can't leave now. There'll be a civil war. All of our 4,000 and more and 30,000 who were injured will have died in vain. We have to stay there. And Barack Obama will say, change circumstances, we'll have the troops there. And he's always hedged with regards to his withdrawal. But, of course, change circumstances. He says, I'll listen to my military advisors. And remember, he's going to listen to his military advisors. It's like having the chickens listening to the fox telling them how they should be safe. The military, and you can understand, they do not want to have to tell their troops, you died for nothing. It was, look, Iraq is as bad now as it was, or close to that with Saddam. Internal warfare, strife, the kinds of laws that we now see in Afghanistan. By the way, Iraq has something else comparable in their constitution that we celebrated. It's Article 7 says, no law can be passed that's contrary to the universal tenets of Islam. I was over there once and debating this particular issue. I said, all right, let's see, if Salman Rushdie wants to sell satanic verses in Baghdad, what happens to him? Because you have a provision in the Constitution that says freedom of speech is absolute. They said, well, we kill him. I said, well, how's that freedom of speech? I said, well, freedom of speech doesn't include that, suggest that the Quran isn't infallible. That's the country that we're protecting now in Iraq. But I'm telling you that the military people will say we have to stay, because they don't want to have all their troops have died in vain. They want to say, hey, we can't leave now because it's so politically unstable. And they know, Iran already is trying to make certain that any reduction of U.S. forces will mean they will become more prominent, and they clearly have no intent or a desire or interest in seeing Iraq stable and being a rival to them. After all, they fought a war with Iraq for 8 years, from 1980 to 88. So I think all of that is a big optical illusion. And that's why I say, and to some degree, it's the Obama administration, because I think he's the high watermark of our ability to get someone with cerebral capacity in the White House these days. That his continuation of this same attitude and mindset shows how deeply entrenched the psychology of empire is. He was popular enough right after he got elected. He could have pulled every one of those troops home and said, yeah, listen, Al-Qaeda are terrible people. Remember how Israel went after the perpetrators of the Munich Olympic massacres of Israeli athletes? They didn't declare war, but they got them. It doesn't mean, when you not have war in Afghanistan, it doesn't mean you don't have other ways to try to go after and serve that those who are criminals are captured or otherwise killed, but you don't need to have war with all that encroachments on liberties and theories of authority. And in my judgment, Obama's continuation of the war, but using more flowery and eloquent language, shows that we are in very, very great danger at present to losing our entire republic forever. The last thing, if I can just make a closing observation, because you are the future of the country. Now, I'm way past my meridian, so I'm going to be phasing out soon. But it's critical, and this is, I'm 62 years old, so I've been through a lot, all impeachments, everything bad that's happened in the United States, plus good. My most thrilling experience in my entire life was seeing Richard Nixon leave on a helicopter and say, no, I don't care whether you think the most powerful man in the world, the rule of law and the Constitution is more important. And just in thinking of what your own personal destiny should be, I'm telling you, you have in some sense the thrill of trying to turn this trajectory around. And that will be more fulfilling in all your life than going to Wall Street and doing hedge funds and going singing songs or whatever. Because this really does count. This does count. Because it's going to affect your children as well. You will feel each day you get up, you'll say, hey, this is important. My life is important. It's worth being. It isn't triviality here and just doing the optics. And that's why I'm so encouraged you came out. And to the extent that you can raise your level, you can do it. It's happened in the past. The greatest movements in history have began with a handful of people, whether it was the anti-slavery movement or women's suffrage movement or the beginning of the movement to end Jim Crow in the United States. You're never guaranteed success, but I can guarantee it'll be the most rewarding experience of your life. Thanks.